Cloudtts. Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Author Thich Nhat Hanh. Book 3. Chapter 70. The Quail and the Falcon. Although he had never been scolded or corrected by the Buddha, Bhikkhu Svasti was aware of his own shortcomings. Perhaps the Buddha refrained from saying anything critical of him because he could see Svasti's wholehearted efforts to be master of his 6 senses, even if his mastery was far from complete. Whenever Svasti saw another bhikkhu or bhikkhuni being corrected, he took it to heart as if he himself were the one at fault. This provided him with many opportunities to deepen his practice. He especially took to heart any correction and guidance the Buddha gave to Rahula. Rahula continued to make great strides in his practice, and that benefited Svasti's practice as well. Once, while sitting in a forest glade with Rahula, Svasti expressed how fortunate he felt to be a disciple of the Buddha. He said that because he had tasted true peace, joy, and freedom, he had no more desire for the life of the world. Rahula cautioned him, "While that may be true, don't give yourself too much credit too fast. The effort to continually observe and master the senses is the very foundation of the practice, and not even the most senior disciples can afford to grow lax in their practice." Rahula told Svasti about Bhikkhu Vanjisa, a monk renowned for his intelligence and gift with language. He was, in fact, a fine poet who had composed several gathas praising the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha which had earned the Buddha's compliments. When Vanjisa first joined the Sangha, he studied under the guidance of Bhikkhu Nigrodakappa in Agalava, just outside Savatthi. After Nigrodakappa died, Vanjisa went to dwell at Jetavana. One day, while out begging with Ananda, Vanjisa confided that his mind was troubled, and he asked for Ananda's assistance. Ananda learned that Vanjisa was disturbed by the lust he felt for the young women who came to the monastery to bring food offerings. Ananda understood that as an artist, Vanjisa was easily touched by beauty. Ananda appealed to that very sense in helping Vanjisa see how he could use the beauty of the path of awakening in order to transcend his desires for the kind of fleeting beauty that creates only clinging and obstacles. Ananda showed him how to shine his awareness on the objects of his contemplation in order to see clearly the empty and impermanent nature of all dharmas. Practicing according to Ananda's instructions, Vanjisa learned to master the 6 senses. He wrote a poem about this practice, which was now well known to other monks. It went as follows. Even after donning the saffron robe, I chased after desires like a buffalo pining after the farmer's rice. How ashamed I felt! A mighty general, sun-gifted with bow and arrow, might fend off the siege of even 1,000 soldiers. Dwelling in mindfulness, I will not be defeated, even before a throng of beautiful women. I follow the Lord, who is a descendant of the sun. Serenely walking on this path, all desire is released. Becoming master of my senses, I walk forth calmly. Though met by countless obstacles, none can shake my peace. Because Vanjisa was a man gifted with intelligence and talent, there were times when his pride got the better of him, and he felt a quiet disdain for some of the other monks. Luckily, thanks to his practice of mindfulness, he was able to recognize this arrogance within himself. He composed a gatha on this theme. Disciples of Gautama, overcome arrogance. The path of pride leads only to suffering. The man who silently hides his arrogance is on the road to hell. As surely as the man all bloated up by pride. Seek instead the happiness of a peaceful heart. Practice mindfulness to realize the three knowledges. True success can only come when arrogance is subdued. Thanks to his deep awareness, Vanjisa was able to transcend many sorrows and obstacles, and to make great strides on the path of transformation. He attained the fruit of Never-Eterna, confirmed by Venerable Sariputta. The day his heart and mind were opened, Vanjisa composed a poem to express his gratitude to the Buddha. Intoxicated by youthful dreams, I wandered far and wide through marketplaces and countryside, until at last I met the Buddha. All compassionate, he shared the wondrous teaching with me. My faith was awakened, and I donned the robes of a monk. Dwelling in awareness, focusing heart and mind, I have attained the three knowledges, thanks to the awakened one. Far and wide, the Lord has sown the seeds of illumination. Because all beings dwell in darkness, he has shown the way. The Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. Tranquility, joy, and freedom. His words so subtle and profound, his noble life without blame. Skillfully, he leads all beings to liberation. How deep my gratitude! Once in a special teaching session held for the younger bhikkhus, Venerable Sariputta held Bhikkhu Vanjisa up as an example. He told them that in the beginning of his practice, Vanjisa was sometimes troubled by certain afflictions and states of mind. But thanks to determined practice, he overcame such states and attained great understanding. Therefore, Sariputta told the young monks, don't let yourself be caught in any mental complex, whether an inferiority or a superiority complex. Practicing mindfulness, you will be aware of everything that is going on inside yourself, and nothing will be able to entangle you. Learning to master the six senses is a most wonderful method to make firm progress along the path. Listening to Rahula talk about Vanjisa made Svasti feel as if he knew Vanjisa. Though he had met Vanjisa, he had never had a real chance to speak with him. He resolved to find an occasion to get acquainted with Venerable Vanjisa, for he knew he could learn much from Vanjisa's spiritual experience. Svasti remembered how the Buddha once used the image of the sea to explain the practice of mastering the six senses. The Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, your eyes are a deep ocean in which are concealed sea monsters, whirlpools, and perilous currents. If you don't proceed in mindfulness, your boat will be attacked and submerged by the sea monsters, whirlpools, and perilous currents. Your ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind are also deep oceans in which are concealed sea monsters." Recalling those words, Svasti's understanding increased manifold. The six senses were indeed deep oceans whose hidden waves could rise at any moment to submerge one. Rahula's advice was well worth heeding. He should not rest on any laurels. The Buddha's teaching should be practiced continuously. One afternoon, as he sat outside his hut at Jetavana Monastery, the Buddha told the younger bhikkhus a story to remind them to observe and master their 6 senses and not allow themselves to be lost in forgetfulness. The Buddha recounted, one day a falcon swooped down and caught a young quail in her talons. As she flew back into the sky, the quail began to cry. He chastised himself for wandering away from where his parents had told him to stay. If only I had listened to my parents, I would not be in this predicament. The falcon asked, "And where did your parents tell you to stay, you runt?" The quail answered, "In the newly plowed field." To the quail's surprise, the falcon said, "I can catch any quail I want anytime I want. I will return you to that field and offer you 1 more hour of life. I will be looking for you, and in just an hour I will catch you, break your little neck, and eat you at once." And the falcon swooped down again and released the quail in the newly plowed field. Surprisingly, the young quail immediately climbed up on a mound of newly plowed earth and began to taunt the falcon. "Hey, falcon, why wait an hour? Why don't you fly back down and try to catch me right now?" Angered, the falcon tucked her wings close to her sides and shot down at full speed. But the quail quickly ducked for cover in the furrow beneath the mound of earth, and the falcon missed the quail and landed with such force that she broke her breastbone and was killed instantly. Bhikkhus, you must dwell in mindfulness at all times and master your 6 senses. When you leave mindfulness, you enter the domain of Mara, and danger is unavoidable. Svasti was encouraged by the number of sincere and talented young bhikkhus in the Buddha's Sangha. One day he was invited with several other monks to the home of a layperson named Sitta, who lived in the village Makikasanda. It was on this outing that Svasti learned how bright one of these young bhikkhus was. Lay disciple Sitta was well known for his devotion to the teaching. Because of his large and generous heart, he was deeply loved by the people just as lay devotee Anathapindika was loved. Sitta enjoyed inviting senior disciples to his home in order to offer them food and ask them questions on the Dharma. On this particular day, he had invited 10 senior monks and 2 young monks, Svasti and Isiddhata. After the monks were finished eating, Sitta bowed to them respectfully and then asked if he could sit before them on a low stool. He asked them the following question: "Respected venerables, I have heard the Brahmajala Sutra in which the Buddha discusses the 62 false views of contemporary sects. I have also heard the questions raised by members of other sects concerning life, death, and the soul, such as, is the world finite or infinite, temporal or everlasting, are body and mind one or two, will the Tathagata still exist after his death or cease to exist? Will he both exist and cease to exist, or will he neither exist nor cease to exist?" Venerables, what gives rise to these esoteric kinds of views and questions? Not one of the bhikkhus ventured to answer Sitta's question, even after he repeated it 3 times. Svasti was embarrassed, and felt his ears turning warm. Suddenly Isiddhata spoke. He turned towards the senior bhikkhus and asked, "Respected elders, may I respond to lay disciple Sitta's question?" The senior monks answered, "Bhikkhu, you may answer his question if you wish." Turning back towards Siddha, Isiddhata said, "Sir, such views and questions arise because people still cling to a false view of the self. If the idea of a separate self were abandoned, people would no longer have a need to cling to such views or ask such questions." Siddha was visibly impressed by the young bhikkhu's response. He said, "Please, Venerable, could you explain this more clearly? People without a chance to be exposed to and to study the way of awakening generally think of the body as being the same as oneself, or they think that the self is contained in the body and the body is contained in the self. Likewise, they consider feelings to be the same as the self, or they think that feelings are contained in the self and the self is contained in feelings. Such people hold the same views as regards their perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. They are caught in a false view of self. It is precisely because they are caught in a false view of self that they become entrapped by the 62 false views discussed in the Brahmajala Sutra and by questions about the finite and infinite, temporal and everlasting, one and two, existing and ceasing to exist. Lay disciple Siddha, such questions and views are rendered meaningless when, through dedicated study and practice, one breaks through the false view of self. Increasingly impressed by the young bhikkhu, Siddha respectfully asked Isiddhata, "Venerable, where are you from?" "I come from Avanti." "Venerable, I have heard about a young man from Avanti named Isiddhata who became a bhikkhu. It is said that he is remarkably bright and able. Though I have heard his name, I have never seen him." "Have you ever met him?" "Yes, Siddha, I have met him." "Then, Venerable, can you tell me where this talented young monk is at present?" Isiddhata did not answer. In fact, Siddha had already guessed that the young bhikkhu sitting before him was Isiddhata. He asked, "Can it be that you yourself are Bhikkhu Isiddhata?" "Yes, sir," replied Isiddhata. Siddha was overjoyed and exclaimed, "This is a great honor for me. Respected Venerable Isiddhata, my mango grove and private residence in Makikasanda are refreshing places equipped with every convenience. I hope you will come to visit us often. We offer you whatever you may need: food, robes, medicine, or a place to stay." Isiddhata did not say anything. The bhikkhus thanked Siddha and departed. Svasti later heard that Isiddhata never returned to Siddha's home. Isiddhata did not desire lavish praise or offerings, not even from such a well-respected man as Siddha. Though Svasti did not meet Isiddhata again for some time, the image of the bright and humble bhikkhu remained engraved on his mind. Svasti pledged to follow Isiddhata's example and to seek him out whenever he had a chance to pass through Avanti. Svasti knew how much the Buddha loved young bhikkhus who showed determination, wisdom, and concern for the welfare and happiness of others. The Buddha expressed how greatly he depended on these young monks to transmit the teaching to future generations. However, Svasti observed how devoted the Buddha was in teaching all the bhikkhus, regardless of their individual abilities. Some monks encountered more difficulties than others. There was one monk who abandoned the community 6 times, but was still welcomed back by the Buddha for another effort. The Buddha never ceased to offer kindly encouragement to those monks who found it difficult to remember even such simple practices as the 16 methods of observing the breath. There was a monk named Pali who lived at Jetavana. The Buddha was well aware of Pali's shortcomings, but he chose to overlook them in order to provide the bhikkhu with an opportunity to transform himself. Pali seemed incapable of following a number of monastic disciplines. For instance, during meals every bhikkhu was expected to remain seated until he had finished eating. Standing up during the meal for second helpings or to tend to other tasks was not allowed. This discipline was called one sitting for meals. Pali never managed to remember this discipline. His behavior around the monastery was a frequent cause of distress to the other bhikkhus. The Buddha called him aside a number of times and taught him to ask himself this question every morning upon arising: what can I do today to contribute to the community's happiness? But after several months, Pali appeared to have made little if any progress. A number of bhikkhus grew impatient with Pali and spoke harshly to him. Aware of this, one day the Buddha addressed the community. He said, "Bhikkhus, although an individual in the Sangha may possess a number of serious flaws, there undoubtedly remains within him at least a few seeds of faith and love. We must relate to such an individual in a way that will protect and nurture those seeds of faith and love, lest they, too, perish. Take the example of a person who loses an eye in an accident. His family and friends will do everything in their power to protect his remaining eye, because they know how bleak his future will be if he loses it. Thus, bhikkhus, help protect the seeds of faith and love in your brother by treating him kindly." Svasti was present when the Buddha spoke these words. He was deeply moved by the Buddha's loving attitude. He looked up and saw Ananda wiping away tears and knew that Ananda, too, had been touched. Although the Buddha was kind-hearted and gentle, he could also be stern when the occasion called for it. A person who could not be helped by the Buddha was truly a person without a future. One day Svasti was present when a short but impressive conversation took place between the Buddha and a man called Kisi, who was a well-known horse trainer. The Buddha asked Kisi, "Can you please explain to us how you go about training a horse?" Kisi answered, "Lord, horses have different temperaments. Some are quite docile and can be trained by the simple use of gentle words. Others are more difficult and require a firm hand along with gentle methods. Others are still more stubborn and require the use of firm discipline alone." The Buddha laughed and asked, "What do you do when you encounter a horse that won't respond to any of those 3 methods?" "Lord, in that situation it is necessary to kill the horse. If it is allowed to live with the other horses, it will spoil them all. Lord, for my part, I would like to know how you train your disciples." The Buddha smiled. He said, "I do the same as you. Some monks respond to gentleness alone. Others require firmness along with gentleness. Others can only make progress when given stern discipline. And what do you do in the case of a monk who doesn't respond to any of those methods?" The Buddha said, "I do as you do. I kill him." The horse trainer's eyes widened in alarm. "What? You kill him? I thought you were against killing." The Buddha explained, "I do not kill him in the same way you kill a horse." When a person does not respond to any of the three methods we've just discussed, we refuse to let him join the Sangha of Bhikkhus. I do not accept him as my student. That is an extreme misfortune. Being refused the chance to practice the Dharma in community is to lose an opportunity that only arises once in 1,000 lifetimes. What is that if not death to the spiritual life? It isn't just a pity for the person refused. It is as much a pity for me, for I feel great love and concern for that person. I never stop hoping that one day he will open himself up to the practice and come back to us. Long ago, Svasti had heard the Buddha scold and counsel Rahula. He had also witnessed the Buddha correct a number of other bhikkhus. He now understood more deeply the profound love behind the Buddha's rebukes. Svasti also knew how much the Buddha loved him, even though the Buddha never said so aloud. Svasti needed only to look into the Buddha's eyes to know. That night, the Buddha received a guest, and Ananda asked Svasti to prepare tea. The guest was a warrior with proud and aristocratic bearing who travelled with a shining sword slung across his back. He dismounted his steed outside Jetavana and left his sword tucked in the saddle. Sariputta showed him to the Buddha's hut. He was a man of impressive height. His strides were long, and he had a piercing gaze. Ananda told Svasti that the warrior's name was Rohitassa. When Svasti entered the hut to serve tea, he found Rohitassa and Sariputta sitting before the Buddha on low stools. Ananda was standing behind the Buddha. After serving the three men tea, Svasti stood next to Ananda behind the Buddha. The men drank their tea in silence. After a long pause, Rohitassa spoke, "Lord, is there any world in which there is no birth, old age, sickness, or death? Is there any world in which beings never die? By what means of travel can one leave this world of birth and death behind in order to arrive at a world in which death does not exist?" The Buddha answered, "There are no means of travel by which you can leave this world of birth and death, no matter how fast you might go, even if you travel at the speed of light." Rohitassa joined his palms and said, "You speak the truth. I know for a fact that it is not possible to escape this world of birth and death through any means of travel, no matter how fast one is able to go. I can recall a past life in which I possessed supernatural powers and was able to fly through the air faster than an arrow. With one step I could leap from the eastern sea all the way to the western sea. I was determined to escape the world of birth, old age, sickness, and death in order to find a world in which beings were no longer oppressed by birth and death. Day after day I traveled at great speed, never stopping to eat or drink, rest or sleep, urinate or defecate. For 100 years I went at that great speed, but arrived nowhere, until one day I died by the side of a road. Lord, your words are indeed true. Truly one can never escape the world of birth and death by any means of travel, even if one can fly at the speed of light. The Buddha said, I did not say, however, that one cannot transcend the world of birth and death. Listen, Rohitassa, you can indeed transcend this world of birth and death. I will show you the path by which you may do so. In your very own body 6 feet tall, the world of birth and death has its origins, and in that same body are the means to transcend the world of birth and death. Contemplate your body, Rohitassa. Shine your awareness on the world of birth and death as it unfolds in your own tall body. Contemplate until you can see the truth of impermanence, emptiness, birthlessness, and deathlessness of all dharmas. Before you, the world of birth and death will dissolve, and the world of birthlessness and deathlessness will reveal itself. You will be freed from every sorrow and fear. You do not need to travel anywhere in order to leave the world of suffering and death. You need only look deeply into the nature of your own body. Svasti noticed how Sariputta's eyes glistened like stars as he listened to the Buddha. Warrior Rohitassa's face also radiated happiness. Svasti was profoundly moved. Who could fathom how wondrous and majestic the Buddha's teaching was? It was like a piece of epic music. More clearly than ever, Svasti saw how the key to liberation lay right in his own hand. Chapter 71. The Art of Stringing a Sitar. When the retreat season ended, the Buddha returned south. He stopped by the deer park in Isipatana, the place he had delivered his first Dharma talk on the Four Noble Truths 36 years earlier. Though it seemed like only yesterday, much had changed since then. Since the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Dharma had been carried throughout all the countries in the Ganga basin. The local people in Isipatana had built a stupa to commemorate the first turning, and a monastery had been built where many bhikkhus lived and practiced. After teaching the Dharma and encouraging the community there, the Buddha departed for Gaya. He stopped by Uruvela to visit the ancient Bodhi tree, which he found more lovely and green than ever. Many huts were now scattered throughout the forest. King Bimbisara was also planning to build a stupa that would commemorate the spot where the Buddha attained awakening. The Buddha stopped to visit the village children. They were no different from the children of years gone by. The buffalo boy Svasti was now 47 years old and a respected elder in the Sangha. The village children gathered ripe papayas to offer the Buddha. Every child in the village could recite the 3 refuges. From Gaya, the Buddha headed northeast to Rajagaha. As soon as he reached the capital, he headed for Vulture Peak. There he met Venerable Punna, who told him all about his work to teach the Dharma on Sunaparanta Island. Punna had just completed a retreat season there with several other bhikkhus. The number of people in Sunaparanta who had taken refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha had already risen to 500. Throughout the following days, the Buddha visited the spiritual centers scattered throughout the region. One night, while sitting in meditation at one center, he heard a monk chanting sutras. There was something disturbing about the voice, as though the monk was tired and discouraged. The Buddha could tell that the monk was encountering difficulties in his practice. The next morning he asked Venerable Ananda about it and learned that the monk chanting the sutras in the night was Sona. The Buddha remembered meeting Sona several years before in Savatthi. Venerable Sona Kulikana was ordained under the guidance of Venerable Mahakaccana and studied with him for several years on Parvata Mountain in the Karuragara region. Sona was a young man from a wealthy family. He was refined and intelligent but had a frail constitution. He had to make great efforts to endure the homeless life of a bhikkhu, eating only one meal a day and sleeping beneath the trees. But his devotion to the practice never wavered. After a year, he was brought by his teacher to meet the Buddha in Savatthi. That first time in Savatthi, Buddha asked Sona, "Sona, are you enjoying good health? Are you experiencing any difficulties in your practice, in begging, or in spreading the Dharma?" Sona answered, "Lord, I am very happy. I am not experiencing any difficulties." The Buddha instructed Ananda to prepare a place for Sona to sleep that night in the Buddha's hut, and so Venerable Ananda placed another bed there. That night the Buddha sat in meditation outside until 3 in the morning. Aware of that, Sona was unable to fall asleep. When the Buddha entered the hut, he asked Sona, "Aren't you asleep yet?" "No, Lord, I am still awake." "Aren't you sleepy? Well then, why don't you recite some gathas you have memorized?" Venerable Sona recited the 16 gathas contained in the sutra on the full awareness of breathing. His voice was as clear as a bell. He did not stumble over any word or leave any word out. The Buddha praised him. "You recite most beautifully. How many years has it been since you were ordained?" "Lord, it has been a little more than a year. I have the experience of only one retreat season." That was the first time the Buddha and Sona met. Now, when the Buddha heard Sona's chanting, he knew that Sona had overexerted himself. He asked Ananda to accompany him to Sona's hut. Seeing the Buddha, Sona stood up at once to greet him. Buddha asked both Sona and Ananda to be seated beside him, and then he asked Sona, "Before you became a monk, you were a musician, were you not? You specialized in the 16-string sitar, didn't you?" "Yes, Lord, that is correct." The Buddha asked Sona, "If you play the sitar while the strings are slack, what is the result?" Sona answered, "Lord, if the strings are slack, the sitar will be out of tune." "And what if the strings are too taut?" "Lord, if the strings are too taut, the strings are more likely to break." And if the strings are just right, neither too slack nor too taut? Lord, if the strings are just right, the sitar will provide fine music. Just so, Sona. If one is idle or lazy, one will not make progress in the practice. But if one tries too hard, one will suffer fatigue and discouragement. Sona, know your own strength. Don't force your body and mind beyond their limits. Only then can you attain the fruits of practice. Venerable Sona stood up and bowed to the Buddha to express his gratitude for the Buddha's insight. One afternoon, physician Jivaka visited the Buddha. He found the Buddha returning from bamboo forest and asked if he might walk up with him to his hut on Vulture Peak. Jivaka watched with admiration as the Buddha climbed the stone steps. The Buddha, now 72 years old, was as healthy and energetic as ever. He walked with relaxed, leisurely steps, one hand carrying his bowl, the other lifting the corner of his robe. Venerable Ananda walked in the same manner. Jivaka offered to take the Buddha's bowl, and the Buddha handed it to him with a smile. He said, "But you know, the Tathagata has climbed this mountain hundreds of times, always carrying his own bowl without difficulty." The carefully carved stone steps that wound up the mountainside had been a gift from King Bimbisara, Jivaka's father. When they climbed the last of them, the Buddha invited Jivaka to sit with him on a large rock outside his hut. Jivaka inquired about the Buddha's health and travels. Then he looked first at Venerable Ananda, and then at the Buddha. In a solemn voice, he said, "Lord, I feel I must tell you about the situation here. Events taking place in the Sangha are directly related to the current political situation in the kingdom. I believe you should know what is happening." The physician told the Buddha that it had become clear that Venerable Devadatta desired to replace the Buddha as the leader of the Sangha. He already had considerable support among many bhikkhus, as well as among the ruling elite. Venerable Kokalika was his chief advisor. He also had the backing of Venerables Kotamaraka Tissa, Kandadevaputta, and Samuddadatta, all of whom had large numbers of students. Venerable Devadatta was both intelligent and eloquent. He was deeply respected by many bhikkhus and lay disciples. He had not come out and stated directly that he was opposed to the Buddha or the Buddha's senior disciples, but he made frequent allusions to the Buddha's advancing years, questioning whether he still possessed the ability to guide the Sangha. He had even insinuated that the Buddha's approach to the teaching was too outdated to meet the needs of young people. Devadatta enjoyed support from several wealthy disciples. Prince Ajatasattu, for reasons Jivaka was unable to understand, was Devadatta's most devoted supporter. As much as King Bimbisara revered the Buddha, Ajatasattu revered Devadatta. He had a large spiritual center built for Devadatta on Gayasisa mountain, the very place where the Buddha had delivered the Fire Sutra to the Kassapa brothers and their 1,000 disciples. The prince personally brought food offerings to the center every few days. Merchants and politicians, wanting to get in the good graces of the prince, brought offerings and attended Devadatta's Dharma talks as well. Devadatta's influence was growing daily. Already 300 to 400 bhikkhus had pledged their support to him. Jivaka looked at the Buddha and then lowered his voice. Lord, I do not consider the things I have just recounted sufficient to cause worry on their own, but there is one thing that does concern me greatly. I have learned that Ajatasattu is impatient to assume the throne in order to implement his own agendas. He feels that our father has monopolized the throne for too long, in the same way that Venerable Devadatta is impatient for you to pass the mantle of leadership on to him. It is, in fact, my belief that Venerable Devadatta has planted some dangerous thoughts in the prince's head. Lord, I receive this impression every time I visit the palace to tend after the royal family's health. If something unexpected were to happen to King Bimbisara, you and your Sangha could be implicated. Please, Lord, take heed. The Buddha answered, Thank you, Jivaka, for telling the Tathagata about the situation. It is important to know what is going on. Don't worry. I will see to it that the Sangha is not dragged into any unfortunate circumstances. Jivaka bowed to the Buddha and returned down the mountain. The Buddha instructed Ananda not to speak to anyone about what Jivaka had shared. 10 days later, the Buddha gave a Dharma talk to a gathering of 3,000 disciples at Bamboo Forest. King Bimbisara was among those present. The Buddha spoke about the 5 powers necessary to nourish the fruits of enlightenment. They are confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and true understanding. When the Buddha had finished speaking and before anyone else had a chance to ask him any questions, Venerable Devadatta stood and bowed to the Buddha. He said, Lord, you are now advanced in years. Your health is no longer what it once was. You deserve to rest undisturbed and to lead a life free of any irritations for the final years of your life. The task of leading the Sangha is too heavy for you, Lord. Please retire. I would be willing to serve as leader of the bhikkhus. The Buddha looked at Devadatta. He answered, Devadatta, thank you for your concern, but the Tathagata still possesses good health and strength adequate to lead the Sangha. Venerable Devadatta turned to the community. 300 bhikkhus stood up and joined their palms. Devadatta said to the Buddha, There are many other bhikkhus who agree with me. Please, Lord, have no worries. I have the ability to lead the Sangha. Allow me to relieve you of your burden. The Buddha said, Enough. Devadatta, say no more. There are several senior disciples who possess abilities greater than yours, and I have not asked any of them to assume the leadership of the Sangha. How much less would I be inclined to transfer the leadership to you? You do not yet possess the ability to lead the community of bhikkhus. Venerable Devadatta felt humiliated before the great gathering. His face turned red, and he sat back down in anger. The following day at Vulture Peak, Venerable Ananda confided to the Buddha, Lord, I feel great pain over my brother Devadatta's actions. I am afraid that he will seek some form of revenge against you since you criticized him in front of the community. I am afraid a schism may occur in the Sangha. With your permission, I would like to speak privately with Devadatta and offer him some counsel. The Buddha said, Ananda, I spoke severely to Devadatta before the king and community, because I wanted to make it clear that I have not chosen Devadatta to succeed me as leader of the Bhikkhus. Any actions he undertakes now will be in his own name. Ananda, if you think that speaking with him will help him calm down, please do so. A few days later, Jivaka paid a visit to the Buddha. He informed the Buddha that he had heard that Devadatta was plotting to create a great division in the Sangha, but by what means, he did not yet know.